Alright, let's get something straight. If you came into this video expecting to be listening to some over-the-top exaggerated voice from someone who claims he has nothing to do with the White Ranger of the 39th season of Super Sentai, he's not here. Instead, you're gonna deal with me, his alternate self from Earth Zero. You already know about the persona, but this is the closest you'll ever be to learning more about the one who brought that persona to life. As you know, I am a fan of tokusatsu, and I'm not just talking about the big four. I'm also familiar with other toku series like Metal Heroes, Kikaider, and even some obscure ones like VR Troopers, Ryukendo, Triple Lancer, and Waku Saber. I haven't watched all of them though. Now, of course, it wasn't always like that. Like many other things, my passion for tokusatsu began with something small. It began with an obscure streaming service you've probably never heard of, called Netflix. Now picture this. The year's 2011 and Yui Nakajima is the newest addition to a certain idol group. Around that time I was introduced to Netflix and they had a variety of shows. One of those shows was a certain series called Power Ranger Samurai. I was interested in Power Ranger Samurai, so I decided to start watching it, and then I found out that there were actually a lot of Power Ranger seasons. So after finishing Power Ranger Samurai, I started watching the very first Power Ranger season, Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. But around that time, I also learned that Power Rangers was adapted from another TV series in Japan called Super Sentai. And because Samurai was my first Power Ranger season, I started Super Sentai with Samurai Sentai Shinkenger. Around this time, I became aware of another toku called Kamen Rider Decade. But I was not interested in Kamen Rider yet though. That part comes later. Anyway, I continued watching more seasons of Super Sentai, including Dai Ranger, Kaku Ranger, Go Busters, Mega Ranger, Kyoryuger, and Gokaiger. And that's when I learned about even more Kamen Rider seasons, like Kamen Rider O, Kamen Rider Forze, and Kamen Rider Gaim. Oh, and by the way, a lot of my favorite Sentai Rangers were Red Rangers. Now, I still wasn't watching Kamen Rider, but I became more interested when a rerun of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight was on TV. Fast forward to 2014. Nozomi Kawaoto and Honoka Kono were the newest additions to Idol College. I started watching Kamen Rider O. Kamen Rider O was my first Kamen Rider, and Kamen Rider Forze was my second. I also watched other seasons such as Kamen Rider Ryuki, Kamen Rider Decade, Kamen Rider W, and Kamen Rider Gaim. But my favorite Kamen Rider season at the time was Kamen Rider Drive. Now here's the thing, the first 10 episodes of Drive are mediocre at best, but episode 11 was the first appearance of the best villain, not just in Kamen Rider Drive, but all of Kamen Rider. You know how Kuroninja's Twitter handle has a number 9 at the end? Well, I originally wanted Kuroninja's username to be Kuroninja009, as a reference to my favorite Kamen Rider character ever. I didn't really enjoy Kamen Rider Ghost as much as Drive, because Medic wasn't there, but I liked Ex-Aid because the video game and hospital theme reminded me of her. Now, I wasn't really familiar with the Toku community until 2016, or maybe it was 2017. Well, I was aware of the cosplay scene in the Power Rangers and Kamen Rider fandom, but I never watched any tokusatsu content on YouTube until one day when a video appeared on my recommended tab. It was about the history of Kamen Rider Dragon Knight, and I was interested, so I watched the whole video. Then I watched some more videos, and I was introduced to some members of the Toku community. And after that, I slowly began integrating myself into the Toku community, just not the Power Rangers side though. Now, the story doesn't end there. I was already a fan of Super Sentai and Kamen Rider, but I had yet to get into Ultraman. That was until 2020. When it was announced that Shioka Ishizuka from Idol College would be appearing in the 8th episode of Ultraman Z. I decided to watch some episodes of Ultraman Z and catch up with the story, and then I watched episode 8. You see, I was a fan of Shioka Ishizuka before she appeared in Ultraman, but after that I lost interest in Ultraman. I tried to watch some episodes of Ultraman Trigger, but I just wasn't interested in Ultraman, and I kind of got burned out from Toku as the 2020s began. But just as it looked like my interest in Toku was lost, Dawn Brothers came in 2022 and I was excited to watch Super Sentai again. So yeah, that's my story of how I became a Toku fan. This isn't the last you'll see of me though. I'm going to make a video about how Kuroninja came to be, and it's going to give you some insight on what happens behind the scenes. But for now, that is all. Make sure to like and subscribe, and remember, you have nothing to do with Kuroninja.